It's nice to be speaking with all of you. Um, this is the first time I've done this virtually. I've talked to people in person before, so I'm getting used to this platform. So please bear with me, and um, I hope we can all have a pleasant learning experience, and this is going to be rewarding for everyone. Um, a little bit about myself. My name is Dave LaFrenz. I am an autistic adult, and I was not diagnosed autistic until my late 30s. I'm in my 40s now, so I've gone most of my life without knowing that I was autistic. Um, Once I found out I was autistic, it just opened up a whole new world for me, and um, it explained a lot of things about myself that I didn't know. That I always knew something didn't feel right or something, but now I have a little bit more clarity. Um, I consider myself an expert in this area because for my occupation, I work for the California Department of Motor Vehicles. I am a driver licensing examiner. That basically means I get in the car with people and they drive around, and I evaluate if they are safe drivers or not, and if they are if they've demonstrated the safety and the skill necessary to obtain a driver license and have the driving privilege. I have been doing this for about 10 years now, and I thoroughly enjoy my job. I've met people from all over the world, and I've met people that I never would have met otherwise. And I've conducted, once I did the calculations over the 10 years, I've conducted probably about 25,000 drive tests if you count each one individually and you add it up cumulative. So I have expertise in this area. And I am a disability rights advocate. I am a big, strong advocate for autism, particularly because not only am I autistic, but so are my spouse and my child. And I serve on disability advisory and rights committees privately and through my employer. And I just have a passion for helping autistics thrive in the world. And I want to share my experiences as a driving examiner and as an autistic driving examiner with you folks. I've taken autistics on their driving tests before. I've taken autistic youngsters, and I've taken autistic adults. Some may not have disclosed that they were autistic, but I have sensed that some of them are neurodiverse and some of them have spectrum difficulties. Even if they don't come out and say it, I can suspect it. The outcomes that I want to present, and I hope that you all receive from this presentation, I want to identify some of the aspects of autism spectrum disorder that may affect driving. I want to discuss and present how to determine if someone that has ASD is ready to drive and ready to take the driving privilege and responsibility seriously. I will offer some of my personal professional insights as a driver and as someone that evaluates new drivers. And I believe most of us are in California, so I would try to do my best to clarify the process of obtaining a license in California if some of you have forgotten or simply don't know how. Driving it's a privilege, but driving patterns and driving habits change throughout the span of our lifetime. Hopefully how we drive as a teenager is not the same as how we drive as an adult, and even on to being a senior citizen. So I will clarify a little bit how driving changes throughout the lifetime. And with new technology and new vehicles, to highlight some of the safety features on new vehicles that can affect driving positively and perhaps negatively, and how those are becoming more of a common, how those are becoming more of a norm and a basic standard on most vehicles. All right, starting off, some of the aspects that I came up with that can affect a person's ability, an autistic person's ability to drive safely, can include like impaired decision making, that sometimes making a quick decision and making a spur of the moment decision can be difficult. I know myself, a lot of time I prefer to take my time making decisions, but when you're driving, sometimes you have to make a split decision to prevent catastrophe. And that's sometimes a difficulty that many autistics have. Some of us may have slower information processing or sensory processing issues. For instance, we may not be able to understand right away that when the light changes from red to green, we need to get ready to go, and not to delay, because we're going to get people honking at you, you're going to upset other drivers, and making the split decision. I have to take the right of way. Do I have the right of way? Oh God, do I take the right of way? Do I stop? What do I do? And a lot of us have difficulty sometimes. Our attention span, we may have a hard time focusing. We may hyper-focus, or we may have difficulty focusing and seeing the whole picture and seeing the broad patterns and the broad perspectives. Sometimes our hyperactive and repetitive behaviors can get in the way. Like our stims, for instance, if we're stimming out too much, let's say we're stopping at a red light, and I know on the drive test we're not listening to music or anything, but if you're stopped at a red light and you're like really into what you're listening to, maybe you're so hyper-focused on that that you don't realize the light changed to green and the people behind you are honking, so you need to go. Sometimes, myself included, we can get frustrated when a routine is interrupted. A lot of autistics I know don't like to have their routines or their norms interrupted or changed. And if you're driving, for instance, and one day, day one, you're driving your normal route, day two, there is road construction. How do I navigate that? How do I adjust that? How do I adapt to that? Am I going to have a meltdown? Am I going to be able to cope with that? Is there an emergency vehicle coming? What do I do? How do I get out of the way? Do I freak out? Do my senses overtake me? Different things like that. A lot of sensitivity, light and sound, like for example with the sirens. Sometimes sirens can be just really piercing, particularly if they get closer to you. How do I cope with that? How do I regulate myself to keep myself behind the wheel and to keep everybody else behind the wheel? We may lack coordination, and maybe I have a hard time moving my hands around and moving as I need to, like turning the wheel and using the turn signals and having to adjust the controls. Am I able to adapt and coordinate to turn on the wipers if it starts raining? Am I able to adapt and turn on the defroster if the windows start getting foggy? Can I multitask that way? Can I control my own aggression? Can I control my own aggressive driving? Am I the one that's committing quote unquote road rage, or is everybody else? You know, can I check my temperature? And then can I just control my impulsivity, my need to regulate things? I know that I can't, when you're on the road, you have some control, but you don't have full control. Can I regulate that? Some of the things that, some questions to ask, like, am I ready to drive? Do I need to drive? What are the preparations? What I always first is like, when I've encountered other drivers and stuff, I'm like, you know, examine, why do you need to drive? Do you need to drive for work, for school? There's no public transportation. Do you have loved ones you have to take to and from? Really examine why, because driving should be a privilege, and it should be something fun, and it should be something you enjoy doing. And from experience, those that felt like forced or quote unquote forced or compelled to do it tend not to enjoy it as much. And from experience, those that are in that predicament tend not to do very well on their tests. They may pass, but not as well as I think that they could if they were more relaxed. Do I have any medical conditions that can affect my ability to drive safely? Like in our community, for instance, seizures. Do I have a seizure disorder? Is it going to preclude me from driving safely? Is it going to preclude me from being safe behind the wheel for myself, for my loved ones, and for all the others? Do I have any other medical conditions that may affect my ability to drive safely? Ask yourself, do I really know the rules of the road? The rules of the road, the rules are the same, but they're applied differently in different situations. For instance, some intersections you might be able to turn right on red. Some intersections there might be a sign that says no right on red. Do I understand the differences? Some intersections might have a green turn arrow, which gives you the right of way. Some might not. Do I know the rules? And do I know how to adapt when others don't follow the rules? Do I know where the controls are in my vehicle? And that's kind of something that's overlooked from my experience. As a driving test examiner, the first thing we do before we even go on the road to begin the test is once I'm outside and I greet them, we go over the safety features of the vehicle, the necessary safeties. I check to make sure the outside is safe. The tires have tread, the tires have air, no windows are cracked or anything like that. And then we test the applicant on some of the controls inside the vehicle that are necessary for safety. And if they're unable to identify enough of the controls, then that test counts as a failure, because knowing the controls is imperative before we go on the road. Because once I'm on the road, I'm just there to observe. I can't give any instructions. If I have to intervene, that's the end of the test. And another thing that determining if I'm ready to drive, can I see the whole picture? Can I focus on the entire pattern at the intersections on the road? Or am I only focusing on the cars ahead of me? Or do I see all the other cars in the other lanes, the other directions? Do I see the guy that's speeding and cutting everybody off? Or am I only seeing the people that are getting out of the way? And with the weather, am I seeing these different patterns? And how well am I able to make quick decisions? And how am I able to adapt? Sometimes I might have to make a split decision. Maybe slam on the brakes because someone darts out in front of me, or because the person, I have the green light, but some other bozo is running a red light. Can I slam on the brakes if necessary to keep from T-boning or being T-boned? Can I react like that? Um, and then, can I assert myself? Like, can I take the right of way? Do I know when I have the right of way? Do I take the right of way? Um, you know, am I passive or am I assertive? I don't want anybody to be aggressive, but being passive as a driver can be just as much of a detriment as not being assertive enough. And our driving habits change as we grow older throughout. Because as we age, sadly, our reflexes are not as quick as they are when we're younger. I've tested, I test, like I mentioned before, I test new drivers and I test senior drivers, and I test people with vision problems, with physical and mental conditions. And let it be clear that I only test regular vehicles and motorcycles. I don't test big rigs or any of those commercial vehicles. And our reflexes. Am I able to turn on the wipers when it's necessary because it's raining? Like I mentioned, am I able to apply the brakes swiftly and quickly enough to prevent a disaster, to prevent an accident? Am I able to steer out of the way in time to keep from hitting someone? Such. And also our vision. Our visions and our vision and our depth perception can weaken. With vision, I've taken people that have severe vision problems that we have to limit the term of their license because they have vision problems and progressive conditions that sadly are not going to get better. And our depth perception, like, for example, I'm farsighted. I sometimes have trouble seeing what's right in front of me. I can see the exit sign a mile down the freeway, but I don't see the sign right here that tells me the speed limit, for example. Not as easily, at least. And as our driving habits change, we also tend to drive in different areas. Hopefully, we don't all drive in the same place. If we do, more power to you. That's great. But once you get your license, it allows you to legally drive in different locations. You have to adapt, and our driving habits change. For example, driving on the 405 freeway in LA is going to require a lot of a change as opposed to driving on 78 in North County or driving on residential streets. And what are we habituated to? And it helps to have our bad habits corrected as early and as often as possible, because if we don't correct our bad habits, they become ingrained and they just become the norm. Do I have a bad habit of not turning on my signal when I change lanes? That's imperative. How do the other people know what you want to do? You gotta have that bad. You gotta have good habits. And the early on that those are learned, the easier it becomes. And part of my evaluation as an examiner, I evaluate that people are following the rules of the road, but also how they control their vehicle. I also evaluate the habits. Am I noticing a pattern here? Does this person not change? Do they not signal when they change lanes? Does this person gun it when they're accelerating? Does this person apply the brakes roughly and smoothly? Those kinds of things. And just also, I want to point out some of the modern safety features that are on today's vehicles and are becoming more of a norm. And a lot of that, like sensors, for example, like a lot of newer vehicles have particularly like the electric vehicles, like Tesla, for example, they have like an automatic braking feature. It'll detect the hazards and it'll stop braking. And you know, they have lane assist, a lot of cars. If you start drifting over, the car will correct itself and stay in the lane for you. And some of them have the self-backing features. You know, they're on their way. They may not be the norm yet, but they're becoming the norm. And you know, all cars nowadays have backup cameras. You know, do I rely on that, or do I still look over my shoulder? I encourage people not to rely on the backup camera because, hey, what if it breaks? What if it shorts out? You know, you still got to look over your shoulder. You can still be able to do that. A lot of cars have GPS and navigation. Those are helpful, and those are good, but they don't necessarily point out all the hazards. You know, you still got to be looking around. One feature that's that I've noticed that people often overlook is like a lot of cars have tire pressure sensors, where the car automatically senses if all four wheels have enough tire pressure, and when one or more tire is losing pressure, things are out of balance. That can affect how you steer the car, how you brake it, the alignment, and such things as that. And some cars have like automatic seat adjusters that you get in and it has sensors that automatically adjust to the height, size, and weight of the person behind the wheel to make it ideally comfortable for that person to operate the vehicle. All these different factors are things that I've noticed, and I kind of want to briefly go over how the process of getting a license in California. A teenager can get a license. They can start applying for their permit once they're 15 and a half. Once they're 15 and a half, they have to go into a DMV office, submit birth certificate, their social security card, proof of that they're California resident, actually 2 proofs of California residency, and they have to have completed driver's education, which is typically done online now. And they have to have all those documents. They go in the DMV, they'll pay a fee, they'll do a vision test, and then do a written test. And then if you're under 18, a person must they get their permit, they must keep their permit a minimum of 6 months before they can take a behind-the-wheel driving test. 6 months or 16 years of age. And then once they get their permit, if they're under 18, they are required to complete 6 hours of behind-the-wheel training with a professional driving school, in a driver's ed vehicle that has a brake on the side. If some of you remember those from your days of driver's ed, with a certified driving instructor that is licensed and certified by the DMV. And then also they have to complete 50 hours of behind the wheel training with their parent or guardian who has to certify that. And 10 of those hours have to be done at night. And that's a self-certification process. And once those are completed and the person has reached at least 16 years of age and has held their permit for at least 6 months, then they can make an appointment to come into DMV to take their driving test to get their actual license. For persons that are over 18, they don't have to do, all they have to do is submit the documents mentioned before, go in, take the vision test and the written test, and then they can take a driving test whenever they feel prepared, because they're legally considered adults. They don't have to do the behind the wheel training. And for my experience as an autistic driver and an autistic examiner, you know, I have to share. Sometimes I have to regulate myself between one test and another test, because I'm usually going from one car to another car, and so on and so forth throughout the day. I average about 20 to 25 drive tests a day, every day, and like I mentioned before, there are people from all over, all different aptitudes, abilities, what have you. Some people, some of them may speak English, some of them may not, and I have to evaluate them the same way they do everybody else. And sometimes I have to take the time between tests. You know, I got to regulate my sensory needs, particularly if it's if I just finished a drive test that was really bad, that I really had to grab the wheel because the person was about to hit someone, or if I had to grab the brake to keep the emergency brake to keep from something catastrophic happening, or if it just was like a situation where, you know, could have gotten a little hairy, you know, I have to take my break. I have to take a little sensory break. I just got to go calm, center myself, you know, and not let my sensitivities and my difficulties get in the way, because I don't want to keep carrying that into the next test, because that's not fair to the next applicant. You know, if I'm not regulated, I can't really expect them to be fully regulated. They're nervous enough already. And with the autistic drivers that I've taken before, you know, I can't come out and I can't ask if they have any, if they're autistic or they have any difficulties, you know, for obvious reasons. But, you know, I can sense, a lot of times I can sense the things, and I talk with them, and we don't leave until people are ready to go. So they're ready to, we conduct the inspection, and I get in the car and I get the instructions, and then I ask them the questions, and we don't get going on the road until they're ready. And so we both feel that, so I feel that their questions have been answered and that we feel it's safe and good to go. And I've had autistic drivers that are really, really good because they've taken the time to practice, and they know how to navigate, and they know how to control the vehicle. They're prepared, if you will. And sadly, I've taken others that aren't as prepared as they need to be and aren't successful the first time. But I give them the feedback at the end to let them know, hey, you weren't successful this time, but these are the things you need to work on to be successful next time. Practice, work on these, make an appointment, come back when you're able, and hopefully you'll be successful. And I just want to share an experience I had the first time I took a person that was autistic. I didn't know the person was autistic. I only sensed that they were because of their mannerisms and their echolalia and just the way they presented themselves. Because I noticed a lot of behaviors in that youngster that I've noticed in my son. So I kind of had a sense that there was some kind of spectrum difficulty or some kind of spectrum concern. And I'm like, sorry, I took that in consideration. We conducted the test, and while we were out on the test, I would give the direction. I gave the young man directions. For instance, for like at the next intersection, make a left turn, and he would say in kind of a robotic fashion, hey, at the next intersection, turn left, and he would narrate what he's doing. He's like, okay, I'm turning on my left signal, checking my mirror, checking my blind spot. It's clear, it's safe. Moving into the turn lane, and then proceeding and doing that throughout. And that had really helped him focus and concentrate, and he did really well. And I gave him the feedback, and when we got done, the dad came up to me, and the dad asked, like, how did he do? And I told him he did really well. He was focusing and concentrating, and he was talking himself through what he needed to do so he could regulate and do his best. And the dad said, well, he's autistic, and I wasn't sure if he would. And then I shared with him, this was before I was diagnosed. So I shared with him that my son is autistic too. And I kind of noticed some of the similar things, and he did well. And it just felt like a moment, like, the universe smiled on me. I was in the right spot at the right place, that I was put right there at that time for that purpose, to do that test. And, I get a little emotional whenever I think about it, because, it validated what I do. It validated who I am, who I serve, and my purpose. And, whenever I have a bad day, or whenever I feel like, I'm not making a difference or anything, I bring that up. I think back to that moment, and I know that I'm in the right place at the right time doing what I do. Those are a few of the things on the list that I put, the aspects that affect of autism that can affect driving. That list was not all inclusive. Those are just ideas that I came up with. Autism is a spectrum. It's no two autistics are alike. No two people are alike. It's a broad spectrum. Those are just some of the things that I've encountered to believe that affects autistics. And I guess I could take some questions if necessary. I just wanted to give my information, share my thoughts, share my perspective, give you what I know. I want to share my experience as an autistic, serving the community. And I know that driving can be kind of scary, and can be kind of difficult and overwhelming starting out. I just want you to know that you can do it. I don't know. Questions, where do I start?
Thank you, Dave. That was awesome.
Thanks.
So if we can get to questions. The first one that I have is from Felix. Does the DMV or any other organization provide refresher driving classes for autistic current drivers? Can you provide any advice on how to deal with the police, like a traffic violation?
That's a great question. First off, the DMV cannot, because we're a public service agency, we cannot recommend or endorse any specific organization or agency. I know a lot of the driving schools will offer lessons and refresher courses, because I know they often do it for senior drivers that have to be reevaluated, that just need a little brush up on their skills. You'd have to check with the driving school about that. Handling the police and traffic violations, that's a great question. Fortunately, on a driving test, I only got my applicant. I've only had one applicant ever get pulled over, and I'll just share what happened to that person. That person was not autistic, but that person turned left on a green light without yielding to the oncoming traffic. And the oncoming vehicle happened to be a police car. And I tried to stop the person, but they were going too fast. I wasn't able to stop them, long story short. And once they turned, I told them, yeah, police car had the right of way. Because once they turned, I saw in the side mirror, I saw the police car turn on the lights. And I told the person, that police car had the right of way, not you. So I got my person safely pulled over. The officer pulled up, came up to the window, and this was a 16-year-old kid, and he was petrified. I think as we all would be. And I just gave the kid his paperwork. I'm like, when he comes to the window, just answer his questions, just try to be calm. And the officer came up and talked to him, and then he looked at me, and I just told him, I showed him my identification badge. I'm like, we're conducting a driving test. And the officer asked him, well, what did you do? You know why I pulled you over? And the kid knew because I had just told him. And fortunately, the officer was gracious and didn't cite him or anything, just let him off the warning. And we got back, and the kid was like, that was scary. He's like, could I get a ticket? I'm like, yes, of course you could have got a ticket. You committed a violation. That officer was very gracious to you. Unfortunately, you didn't pass your test, but I would just say when as someone that's neurodiverse, if you encounter the police, just try to stay calm, regulate yourself. I keep in my car, I keep like a little fidget spinner and little things to help regulate myself, nearby. So if I am getting into this is as a civilian driver, I just keep like a little fidget spinner or something nearby. So when I start getting stressful, I can just start doing something to keep my mind off what I'm doing. If you get pulled over, just don't do anything. Just do what the officer says. Hopefully that it's somebody that's reasonable and rational and whatnot. But just do as they ask. Always know where your registration and your insurance are at all times, because 9 times out of 10 they're going to ask for that. Always have your license on the ready. Just don't do anything until they ask you to do it. Don't just hand them your license. Let them do the talking, and just try to be calm. And I pray to God nobody ever gets in that situation.
Okay, so the next question is from Sandy. Sandy asks, will the DMV, does the DMV provide special accommodations when taking the driving test?
Well, what do you mean by special accommodations? Well, I know that you can't really you can't choose your examiner. You can't choose who takes you on the test. We typically, and I can't speak for every office, I know in my office, if I took a person on day 1 and they weren't successful, then one of our other examiners will take them on day 2. I won't do the test again. So it's more fair and more objective. Special accommodations, it helps to let the examiner know what the needs are. That doesn't mean that you don't have to follow the rules or the criteria, or you're not held to the same expectations as anybody else. It's just, if you know them the situation and give them some guidance on, like this person has slow information processing, perhaps speaking slowly and clearly, maybe using hand signals and such, that could help. I know for persons that don't speak English, we have a translation sheet of common languages. And we have translations of the instructions and the controls in the more common languages so they can read it and understand it. Um, we can't really provide special accommodations unless we know what those special accommodations are, particularly on the driving test. I know for the written test that they can provide. Before COVID, we were doing face-to-face. You could do the written test face-to-face in a room with other people, and an employee would read the questions out loud, and you would fill out an answer sheet. That changed because of COVID and social distancing. And you can listen to the test on headphones as an example, or you can do the test on written paper instead of doing it on the touchscreen computer. But out on the road, it would depend on what the accommodation is. You'd have to talk with the examiner about what we could do.
Okay, so the next question is from Kira. Kira asks, what coping techniques can you suggest for some of the driving challenges that come with autism?
A lot of deep breathing. You know, I practice a lot of mindfulness and just really centering myself. In particular, having fidget spinners, having fidgety things nearby, if necessary. I've known people that, like, back in the day when they used to have dice hanging from the mirror. I know people that would fidget with that. They would like play with that, so they're fidgeting so that that's regulating for them. A lot of people will rock back and forth to help regulate their bodies and their proprioceptive system. And like I mentioned in that story, talking to yourself throughout the test. I don't care if you talk to yourself during the test. That's fine by me. As long as you're being aware, you're driving safely, you're following the established criteria, by all means, talk to yourself if you need to. Do things, and those are things I would recommend you. Those are just some of the things I can suggest. I would recommend practicing those well before you come to take your driving test. Have those well rehearsed. I don't know if that's the right word, but be well regulated. When you're practicing, not just practice learning the rules of the road, but practicing regulate yourself and controlling how you're going to be in control of yourself, particularly when you have no control over the elements.
Okay, so the next question is from Lainey. How would you suggest insurance for new autistic drivers?
For insurance, that's not really my area. I would definitely recommend you talk to whoever your insurance agent is, tell them the situation, and hopefully they can guide you in the right way. I don't know if you'd want to take out separate and get extra insurance or whatnot. That's really not in my purview. But I would recommend talk with your insurance agent, tell them the concerns, tell them what you're thinking, what you're feeling, and if they offer any incentives or anything, like good driver discount, something to that effect. That's a great question. I really don't know how to adapt to that one.
Okay, so the next question, this is a clarification from Sandy relating to accommodations. Sandy says, will they allow parents to accompany if it helps them calm down?
Sadly, we can't allow anybody else in the car during the test. It's a liability. I know that they have allowed emotional support animals before, because I've had applicant, like I took an applicant that had severe PTSD, had an emotional support animal. They allowed that. We don't allow other persons because of the liability, and we don't want that person to influence how the person behind the wheel is driving, or coaching them or anything. It's just supposed to be the examiner and the applicant, the examiner evaluating them. That in that situation, that's where I would recommend talking thoroughly and deeply, and rehearsing before you come to take the test, and letting the examiner know beforehand, and getting everything squared away before we leave to go on the road, because the test isn't timed. If it takes 10 minutes or if it takes 45 minutes, it doesn't matter. The test isn't timed. Safety is more important. We care more about being safe and getting to and from safely and efficiently as possible than how long it takes.
Okay, the next question is from Patricia. Are you still doing the driving test in the car with all these people during the pandemic?
Yes, we are. We have taken safety precautions that we're doing the outside inspection and testing for the controls, and I'm giving the instructions, everything outside the vehicle. Inside the vehicle, I have the option of putting on plastic seat protectors or wearing smocks, but the smocks are too hot for the weather, so I put on the seat protection and I wear safety gloves, and we obviously have to all wear our masks. And the front two windows have to stay down throughout the exam. Even when it's 110 outside, got to keep the windows down. Those are the safety precautions we've taken so far.
Well, okay, so then the next question is from MK. Should the person disclose their disability before the test, and does it help the examiner to know?
It's your choice if you want to disclose your disability. Obviously, you're not compelled to. If you believe it's going to help you be successful, then by all means do so. But I would recommend you let the examiner aware of it. We're not going to go easy on you, so to speak. I mean, we're going to evaluate you the same way as any other driver. If you commit a critical error, you commit a critical error. It's always helpful if you feel compelled to let them know, that I would do so. If you think it can impact your ability to drive safely, then that's a choice you have to make, you and your loved ones. And if you feel like your disability is going to hinder your ability to drive safely, then it may be a good choice, but that's going to be something you have to discuss with you and your loved ones. I would recommend it personally, because I think the more you know, the more you let others know, the better it can be overall. That's my opinion, but you ultimately have to make that choice.
Okay, this may have been covered earlier, but maybe Jenny wasn't in. So Jenny asks, if you are over 18, do you still need to have, or do you still have to get the permit? And then if you don't, how do you practice driving?
Yes, you still have to get the permit, but you are not required to do behind the wheel training with the driving school. You still have to get the permit, and you have to practice with a licensed adult, 18 years of age or older, but you don't have to take behind the wheel driving. You don't have to take the driving lessons with the driving school. You just have to get your permit, practice as often and as safely as you can, and schedule a driving test whenever you feel ready. Yeah, the driving, if you're over 18, you're considered an adult, you don't have to do the behind the wheel training, but you still have to get a permit. Everybody has to have a permit to begin the driving process.
Okay, so we've gone through all the written questions. Does anybody, oh, we just got some right now. Okay, let me get through those. If we've never had a problem, or Patricia asked, if we've never had a problem, at what age do we have to redo the behind the wheel test?
Good question. Typically, a person, once they receive their license, they don't, in California at least, they don't have to do the behind the wheel driving test typically ever again, unless they develop a vision problem and they're not meeting the department's vision standards, or they develop some kind of physical or mental condition that necessitates taking the driving test again. And we have a separate division that evaluates that. Like, for example, if someone gets glaucoma and isn't able to pass the vision standards, they're going to have to take a driving test so we can see how they compensate for the glaucoma. If a person develops Alzheimer's or dementia, we have to evaluate them to see how they compensate for that, if they're able to compensate for that. And like, I have to be honest, just as I have the authority and privilege to issue licenses to new drivers, I'm also mandated and have the authority to revoke licenses if necessary for public safety.
I forgot to ask the second part. So Patricia's asking, at some age, don't we have to prove we can still drive safely? I haven't taken the behind the wheel test since I was 16.
No, every 5 years, your license is due for renewal. And if you maintain a good driving record and good driving history, and you maintain insurance, and you take your privilege, the driving privilege, seriously. And I want to emphasize the word privilege because it is a privilege. It is not a right, though people may treat it that way. If you treat the privilege as it's intended, you would just have to renew every 5 years, and about every 15 or 20 years or so, you have to do the written test again to refresh yourself on the rules of the road. But once you reach age 70, you still have to renew every 5 years. But after age 70, you have to do the written test after every renewal. Yeah, so maintain a good driving record and take the driving privilege seriously. You won't have to do the written test very often.
Okay. Gina asks, can you get an extension on your permit past 1 year if your child is not ready?
Well, there's two parts to that. Right now, because of COVID, we are granting an extension because a lot of permits expired during the pandemic when we were closed and we weren't able to conduct tests because safety protocols weren't in effect. Those permits are being extended. They have to come in and reapply, but we're not charging any fees, and we're waiving the written test they've already done. That's the one situation. If it wasn't affected by COVID or anything, the permit's good for a year. If you're not able to get everything done within a year, then it becomes void and you got to reapply and do everything again. Because they're issued for a year. And we made an exception for COVID because obviously you can't do your test when they're not open. But those are typically, it's good for a year. You have to reapply after a year if you're not getting it done. And depending on what the situation is, you may or may not have to do the test again, depending on what happened.
Okay, so we have a question from Maya. Did your diagnosis help you with your driving?
That's a great question, and I really think it did. Because it made me a lot more aware of my bad habits. It made me a lot more aware of my perception because I didn't really analyze the traffic patterns at the intersections. I just knew when I had the right of way, it was my turn to go, and I just knew when the other person did something wrong. But it made me a lot more. I've always been analytical, but it made me hone in a lot more and be a lot more analytical. It made me notice my driving habits. What am I doing to affect the other drivers or not doing? You know, because there's an old saying that if you don't know who the bad driver, if you can't recognize the bad driver on the road, you're the bad driver. You know, so I started recognizing my own habits, and I became a lot more aware of my impulsivity, and it has helped me a lot. And you know, I became more aware of my own sensory issues. You know, that you know, like the sirens, for instance. You know, why did I always hate the sound of sirens? And I'm like, okay, well, because I have very sensitive hearing, and I've been overstimulated sense of hearing, and you know, and when I started learning how to drive, I grew up in the Midwest, so I drove in different kinds of weather, rain, snow, that kind of thing, and I even started. I mean, I think back now, I'm like, okay, why was I more cautious when I was doing this and not doing that? Okay, because you know I was autistic and I didn't know it, and now that I know it, all right, yeah, I think for me, I believe it's made me a safer driver because I'm more aware of my own habits and the habits of other drivers, and I know how to adapt when others can't or won't.
Okay. So, all right, there's two more questions written here, but then I want to allow anybody who wants to say something to be able to ask their question, since we've given a lot of weight to the written responses.
Sure.
So let's get these two questions down, and then we'll switch to voice, and then I'll read the other ones after for those folks who haven't or who got to talk. So Lonnie asks, how are you going to give your son the skills he needs to drive in the future? Are you going to start him at 15 and a half?
Great question. Right now, he doesn't show any, and my son is a teenager. He's 14. He's not really interested in driving, and I'm not going to push it on him. You know, driving should be something you want to do, not something you have to do, like I mentioned before. How am I going to give him the skills in the future? If and when he decides that he wants to drive, I'm going to start with the baby steps that I was learned. For instance, like right now, and when he's riding in the car with me, I point out different things while I'm driving. You know, like when I'm slowing down because the light is red and I have to stop, I ask him, why am I slowing down? You know, and I'm like, what color is my light? He's like, red light means stop. That's why I'm slowing down, so I can stop. Why am I going through this intersection? What color is the light? Green. What does green mean? Green means go. You know, started these little things and pointing out the different shapes of the road signs, what the different shapes and different colors of all the signs mean, and just go from there. And you know, if and when he decides he wants to drive, whether it's as a teenager or well into adulthood, I believe I would do behind the wheel training. I think I would do driving lessons, and you know, disclose to the other person, hey, these are his needs. This is what he needs to do, and go forward from there. But I let him lead. You know, if and when he wants to drive, and he is interested and wants to, and asks me about it, then we'll proceed from there. But I won't pressure him to drive. I don't want to pressure him to do anything within reason that he doesn't really want to do, because you know, driving should be fun. Driving should be rewarding. It shouldn't be something stressful. And I don't want that. I don't want to have any negative energy.
Okay, so Gina has a two-parter. My son's permit expires this month. Do we need to make an appointment? And then the second one was, how many times are you allowed to take the behind the wheel?
The first part, if the permit expires, you do need to go into a DMV office to renew it. Appointments are kind of difficult to make right now because a lot of the appointments that were canceled because of COVID are getting remade now, and the canceled appointments are getting the priority as they should. And you don't have to have an appointment. You can go in as a walk-in. You just have to be willing and patient and wanting to wait, because we still have to follow social distancing and safety protocols. We can only let so many people in the building at a time, and there's only so many resources. If you do have to go in, if it does expire, you're not able, you're gonna have to take in all the documents before. If it, we're not going to charge you right now at this time for. There's not going to be any. You're not going to take any tests, any written tests. You just have to take the vision test again. When you take on the written test, the person gets 3 opportunities to pass the written test on their application fee. If they're not successful after 3 times doing the written test, then they have to pay the application fee again. And the person gets 3 chances behind the wheel to pass the test. If you don't pass behind the wheel after 3 times, then the permit becomes void and you have to do the application process again.
Okay, so right now I just want to open up to anyone who wants to unmute themselves and ask. And I'd like to give preference to folks who haven't asked a question yet. If they've been wanting to ask one, you can unmute yourself, and the unmute icon is on the bottom left, and it's a little microphone. Justin, do you want to ask anything?
Sure. Is there any tips on how I can cope on a freeway?
Is there any? I heard about freeway.
Yeah, because I know I have like I'm wanting to learn to be a safe driver.
Sure.
Yeah, but I know there's some areas I need to work on. But is there any ways how to handle in a very fast-paced road?
Any coping strategies specific?
For the freeway? Yeah. Just for starters, when we do the driving test, we don't go on the freeway. I don't know why. I don't make those rules. The only time we go on the freeway during a driving test is if it's a person that's being reevaluated because of a vision problem or physical or mental issue.
Right.
Some coping strategies I would recommend on the freeway is do your best if you can to try to stay in the slower lanes and keep up with traffic. If you're able and your car has cruise control, use the cruise control. You know, that can help regulate the speed. When you get on the freeway, look at how fast the other cars are going.
Right.
Right. I mean,
type all this down.
I'm sorry?
Can you type all this down so I can, keep track of it?
Yeah. Watch your speed and watch the other's speed. And if you don't have to use the freeway, then try not to use the freeway. If you can get to where you want to go using surface streets, that may be a better option.
I can talk with Dave. Sorry, Dave, just to interrupt just a second. What I can do, Justin, is Dave and I can talk, and I can get I believe I have your email from Eventbrite, so I can email you the little tips if you need it written.
The one last thing I want to say to that is try to stay off the freeway as much as you can during peak hours. Don't be there during rush hour in the morning or during rush hour after work. So try not to be on there between 6 and 9 in the morning or between like probably 3 and 6 at night, maybe. But do your best to stay off those times because that's when more people are on the freeway and more people tend to be aggressive.
Good tips. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Anyone else have a question?
There is a really great program that I was, this is Lonnie, that I was lucky enough to be a part of, and it is with Intricate Mind Institute, and they have their driving classes. What they do is they teach you about driving on the highway, the signs to look out for, kind of ways to cope. And I was just thinking of sharing that resource with you guys. I know she is working with SDSU now, so you probably already know her.
What was the name?
Mary Baker Erickson.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, she's one of our newest members to the center.
And also a good resource that I remembered is at UCSD, they have called the RAD Lab, RAAD, and I can't remember offhand exactly what it stands for, but they have like a driving simulator there that it's kind of like a video game. I don't know if anybody remembers the old video game Pole Position. We had to get inside the thing and you had the wheel and you had to try to control the car and navigate around hazards and such. They have something similar to that, which I got to go out. I got to go there when they first brought it out and evaluate it and give my feedback and give my 2 cents. And it was really helpful. It was really a good thing they had set up because they had, you had put on headphones, you heard these things, but you didn't know where they were coming from, so you had to adjust and react. They put in these makeshift obstacles in a safe environment. So it was a way to practice being behind the wheel without actually going out on the road and being behind the wheel. And the woman who ran it, I think her last name was like Tchaikovsky or, yeah, I have her name. I don't know it offhand, but I can get that resource. Yeah, she was very helpful and she really welcomed my feedback. That's another good resource. The RAD Lab, RAAD at UCSD. If you Google it, you'll find it.
Okay, great. Anyone else have a question they'd like to ask out loud?
Oh, this is Dan. Just had a quick, maybe just a comment, hopeful comment.
Okay.
I'm sorry.
I can hear you.
Yeah, we can hear you, Dan. Oh, did you disappear?
There are,
Oh, you're cutting out. Dan,
Want to type it?
yeah, you can either maybe type it, or if you want to.
music that might be playing or other.
Dan, we
I
can't.
heard music.
So what I would suggest is either write your comment or your question in the chat, or just from my experience with Zoom, if you leave Zoom and come back in, I'll let you in, and that sometimes fixes the cutting out. But we couldn't really catch anything that you were saying. It was like every other word. So if you can type it in or leave and come back, and you can ask. Sorry about that. Anyone else want to ask? Okay, so we have a question in the chat box from Jen. Do you have any suggestions for where to safely begin practicing basic driving skills, like a school parking lot, etc., or should this only start during professional driving lessons?
That's a good question. I would suggest, first off, before even attempting to actually get behind the wheel and start driving or anywhere, is identify where the controls are. Know where the controls are. and know what each control does. You know, why is that there? What is its function? And know where they are typically located on most vehicles. Like for instance, the defroster is always located on the control panel someplace, often near the stereo and heater controls. And know that the rectangle with the squiggly lines, that is always the rear defroster. The one with the curved top and the squiggly lines is always the front defroster, no matter where you are. Know, you know, where the wiper control is, because some have independent wiper controls. Some of them have the wipers as on the turn signal device. Know where they are, know where the different controls are, and make sure that the car's in good shape. You know the car before you even get in the car, so to speak. And then, when you get in behind the wheel, adjust comfortably and practice. I would recommend practicing like a church or school parking lot, something that's not on the weekends, or something that's not a lot of traffic, where you can stop safely and such. You need to, if you're going to be the person that's instructing them, don't be afraid to grab the steering wheel. Don't. It may be helpful if you can to drive a car that has the parking brake in the middle, the handbrake. Don't be afraid to use that. That's why those devices are there for safety. Practice going slowly, and I would recommend practicing learning how to go straight and back, and doing maneuvers, and gradually move up to maybe setting up cones and learning how to go around cones and such, and staying in familiar areas first. Start small, then work your way up. I would recommend definitely knowing the vehicle as best you can, and being consistent. That's one thing. Try to practice in the same vehicle as much and as often as you can, so you develop that awareness and that automatic response reflex. Because the more you change vehicles and such, the more you're going to have to learn what different controls are, how different vehicles handle. For example, a little four-cylinder sedan is going to be a lot different driving than a giant SUV. Be familiar with the car as much as you can. And one pointer is, when you come to take your driving test, bring whatever car you've been practicing in. That really helps you be more successful.
Dan is back. Dan, did you want to try again and say what you want to make your comment? I know you wrote, I was mentioning to limit distractions as you drive. Thanks. But if you want to try again, you can say what those limiting distractions were.
For example, don't have the music so loud that you can't hear what's going on outside. It's my understanding it's still legal to drive with the headphones on or earbuds in, so don't have those on. And try to limit, don't eat or drink while you're driving. Just trying to think of the common distractions that we see on the daily. When you're behind the wheel, let that be your focus. That I'm going to get from A to B as safely as I can, and don't worry about time. Don't let time be a factor. Just worry about getting there safely. It's better to get there, take a half hour to get there, than drive unsafely and get there in 10 minutes.
So before I go to the written question, was there anybody else who wanted to say a comment out loud or ask a question?
I have another really good comment. Actually, Sandy asked me a question about, you know, because I got my driver's license when I was 24 and I'm on the spectrum. And she was kind of wondering, you know, since her son is 21, she's worried because he's not really interested right now. And I told her that I had a deep fear before I started really driving, and I was telling her what kind of helped me get past my fear. Personally, for me, it was the fact that I had somebody in the passenger seat with a brake, and that felt like my safety net.
Yeah, that's great. Definitely don't drive until you feel ready, until you want to drive. Do not let somebody else pressure you into driving or into getting a driver license. You know, if you need ID, you can get an identification card. You don't have to get a driver license. Don't let somebody pressure you into getting because you know, driving should be fun. It should be rewarding. It should be something you enjoy doing, that you want to do. If you feel pressured to do it, you're not going to enjoy it as often, and you're going to you may make mental mistakes out on the road that you may not make otherwise. Just like, you know, don't drive when you're angry, don't drive when you're stressed. Don't drive if you don't feel emotionally regulated, then wait. If you have public transportation options available to you and it's something you're willing to use and you know how to navigate, you know how to get access to, use those. But I want safe drivers on the road. I think we all want safe drivers out on the road. And from my experience doing this for over 10 years, those that want to do it enjoy it more and have more success than those that feel compelled to do it.
Can I say one more thing? So there was a case that I observed where the student was told by their parents, you should get your driver's license or else, you know, you won't have access to a job. And basically, so he had all these thoughts in his head about, oh, I need to do this to drive correctly. But then actually during the driving test, he was driving too slow, too cautious.
Yeah, there is a balance. You can be overly cautious and not cautiously enough. You have to practice and work on that balance because sadly, I've had to disqualify people for driving too slow because they were creating a hazard. They were impeding traffic. They were the hazard, if you will. You got to maintain a safe speed for the conditions that you're in. You can't just go whatever speed you want. And if somebody says you need to have a driver license to get a job, I don't necessarily know if I agree with that. You may need identification, obviously, to get a job, but you can get an identification card at the DMV, which does not give you the driving privilege, but it's an ID card that identifies who you are, and it can serve the same function as a driver license in identifying who you are. Obviously, some jobs compel you to have a license because of the nature of the job. If that's the situation, then you need to talk that over with the people in your circle and determine the best way to navigate that.
I agree with you. I think that maybe the mother wasn't as knowledgeable and that later she self-educated and realized that he needed to make the decision, even though he felt pressure because he needed to do work to stay in the house. She learned that maybe he doesn't need this extra pressure, and then he will still do well.
Yeah, the more calm you are and the less pressure you feel, the more you're going to enjoy it, the more successful you're going to be on your test. And the more I think you're going to be able to adapt to all the different factors of driving, and being able to adjust to the detour that's there one day but not the next day, for example.
So Sandy had a question kind of in this line. She was saying, my son at 21 is not showing any interest in driving. In your experience, do some people on the spectrum become interested in driving later in life?
Yes, they do. And I've seen, I haven't personally tested any autistic drivers that are really later on in life, but I've heard of them not getting the licenses till they were late 20s, well into their 30s. And, you know, it's like any other interest. You have to, you got to have like, you have to like to develop the interest inherently. And, you know, hopefully somebody will guide you toward it, or, you know, propose it as something interesting and that you want to gravitate toward or gravitate to. And you see others doing it and enjoying it. Hey, I might want to try this out. I might want to pursue that. That might look like fun. That's kind of going back to the, I take that back to the question that somebody asked me earlier about with me and my son, with him wanting to learn how to drive. If he shows an interest in wanting to drive, great. You know, I talk about it with him. I talk about what I do. I want him to know what I do for a living. That's important for him to know. And if he wants to pursue it and the time is right, and all the chips fall where they may, then go for it. But yeah, there's no age on doing it. I've taken like neurotypicals that haven't gotten their licenses until they were like in their 40s. It's like they lived in metropolitan areas their whole lives, and have always had access to public transportation and never need to get a license. And now they move to Southern California, where it's one big freeway, so to speak, and you have to get a license.
Are there any other questions? We have a few more minutes before we have to wrap up. You can either put your question in the chat, or you can unmute yourself and ask your question verbally.
Okay, I know I'm gonna stop pretty soon. There was another Mary Baker Erickson provided to me. She invited me to a course called Command and Control, and that just helps you with organizational skills and how to get to a certain goal. And I thought that was really useful, and I was hoping that maybe by contacting you, that I could share that with you as well as a resource. But I can't find the information right now.
Yeah, Lonnie, if you want, I'll put my email in the chat box. And if you can email me.
I think you did share it.
Did I? Okay. So then we can chat, and then I will pass on any resources that you have. And I will talk to Dave, and we will send out an email with all these great resources that have been mentioned by Dave and by others, and also a link to the video and other resources that kind of popped up in this discussion.
Yeah, I just want to add that what was that, like Command and Control?
Correct.
I don't think I've heard of that one, so that's something I definitely want to look into and see what it's all about.
You would enjoy the class so much. It's comprehensive. It's like stepping away from the up close kind of problem and just kind of digesting it and then zooming back in, monitoring your energy level, like a phone. How do you get your energy up? How do you lower it? Because when you're upset, your thinking is not really there as much.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
like in driving, if you're anxious and worried, your thinking is not there when you really need to be doing a lot of thinking, because driving is, I mean, you're driving a weapon basically, like a heavy machine.
Yeah. But if those cortisol levels raise, it inhibits those receptors.